Okay, today we're going from this, which is essentially me just, blowing onto a microphone, to that, just as quickly. So what I mean by this is we're taking a source and then we're just going to convert it to an impact. There are a couple of different ways to do this. If you look at my previous video and my previous blog post about this, you'll notice that I have gone over a simple way to do this, where you take a sound source, you sculpt it by editing it and adding a fade, and then you essentially run it through some processing, and that gives you the impact. What I mean by that, just to sort of quickly reiterate, is to cut a little bit of audio source, create a transient by editing, and then running that into some kind of processing that ultimately gives you a nice heavy impact. This, however, is a time-consuming process, so I want to automate this. And this video is inspired by another video that I link in the description, which does this in a very similar way, but that person uses Serum FX. Today I'm going to be using SnapHeap, and I'm going to be adding a little bit of my own spin on this whole technique. So to get started, let's take a look at the SnapHeap preset. So if you don't know what SnapHeap is, it's essentially like a container for a lot of kilohertz plugins. I say a lot, I mean all of their plugins. And you can basically mix and match these plugins in any order you want. You can run them in parallel, run them in serial, and then you can add envelopes. You can add a bunch of other like LFOs and modulators. You can have a lot of fun with this. You can build some pretty complex patches, and then you can add macros to it on top. So if you've used something like Serum FX, this might be kind of similar, but I'd compare it more to probably like, I don't know, Guitar Rig. That's the only analog I can think of. It's really not the same at all, but essentially it's a container for a lot of different smaller modules, and then you can, build patches with it. It's really great. It's incredibly powerful. I've barely scratched the surface of what you can do with SnapHeap, but I've seen people do incredible things with it. It's a really useful tool. So having said that, head on over to Kilohertz, pick up SnapHeap if you want. But if you do have something that does similar stuff, like what I'm about to show you, these techniques should apply to anything. You could even potentially do it within Reaper using Reaper's LFOs. But this is probably the easiest way I can think of right now. At least it is for me. So I'm just going to go ahead and run through this patch. I will switch off all the different buses that I've got. I'll start with the basic one. And the first thing we're trying to do is we're trying to get that shape, this shape, this transient kind of shape. So we want to do that, but we want to automate that process. So what I'm going to do for this is I've set up an envelope here, and I am triggering the envelope with an LFO. So this LFO is triggering the envelope on the left, and that envelope is modulating a bunch of gains. Why do I have 4 gains? Well, the gain only goes down to -30, and when I distort it afterwards, things below -30 start coming back up, and I don't want that. So I have multiple of these stacked up. You're probably thinking, yeah, but there's like a gain knob right here. Why don't you just automate this? I could, but just something in my brain wants to keep this free. So I've done this. I'm sure there's a much easier, simpler way to do it, but this is what I've done for now, and it works. So the gain is being modulated by this envelope. And the reason I'm using an envelope and not the LFO directly is because I can adjust the length of my transient without changing the rate at which the transient occurs. Because if I change the speed of the LFO, it's also going to change the rate at which these transients occur. And I don't want that. I want to maintain the rate while also changing the length. So I'll quickly demonstrate what I mean by this. This is going to sound a bit funny because this is just literally noise. It's me just blowing into a mic. I'm going to disable all the other processing I've got for now. It's just SnapHeap. Let's loop it. Right, so immediately we've got something that looks like a transient, and I've got this macro map to decay, sustain, release, and I can adjust the length with that. Right? This is, you'll notice that the space between these transients hasn't changed. So if I were using the LFO, that would change. Again, there probably is a better way to do this, probably is a simpler way to do this. If there is, please let me know in the comments. I would love to know. But this is kind of what I came up with, and it does work for me. I'm quite happy with this patch, to be honest. So there's that. So now we have our shape. So I'm going to leave the length where it is. The shape is good. I'm happy with it. The next thing I want to do is make this bigger. I want to add some harmonic distortion to it. I want to add a little bit more snap to it. So I'm going to make the attack a lot more aggressive. And you can really play with this. Like after you have this shape, to be very frank, everything you do afterwards is kind of up to you. It doesn't really matter. But in my case, what I'm finding more often than not is distortion happens to be one of those things that you just kind of can't avoid unless you want a very like soft and not impactful impact, if that makes any sense. But what I'm finding more and more these days is like saturation is just something I cannot avoid. It's just so great. It always sounds good. It always does something interesting. So without further rambling, I'm just going to switch this on. I've got 3 distortions. Again, much like the gains on the left, they're all doing the same thing. They're the exact same distortions. Why do I have 3? I personally find that if I stack up distortion, it tends to sound better than overdriving a single unit. And all this also gives me the freedom to change the type of distortion that one of these has. So I could maybe essentially get some kind of different color the next time I load this patch up, or I could experiment with this, session that I've got right now itself. It just gives me a little bit more room to play with. After that, I've got the transient shaper, which is just 2 of these guys stacked up, and they're just turning the attack up in different ways. I would like to have 2 different types of transient shapers, but you only have one with SnapHeap, so it's fine. It gets the job done. And then we've got a compressor afterwards just to sort of tame the peaks. You could experiment with putting a transient shaper before distortion and one after. That could also be potentially kind of interesting. Let's take a listen and see what this sounds like. Without and with. Let's put one transient shaper before, see what that does. This is kind of interesting, actually. You know what? I think I'll probably throw one before. And that's, you're 90% there at this point. After this, it's all just fun and your own personal touch, your own personal character that you want to add to this. So at this point, I'm going to quickly run through everything else I've done as fast as I can. After that, I've got some pitch shifting going on. The pitch shifting is also being modulated by the LFO. So we've got this sort of, it sort of pitches down and goes back up, giving it some movement. Ensemble, which is also giving it some, stereo spread and some more movement. And you'll notice that the ensemble, it's kicking in with the envelope. So what's happening here is the immediate attack doesn't have this effect. It only comes in on the tail. So the initial impact is quite narrow, and then it widens out. It's kind of cool. You could kind of exaggerate this, I suppose, and make it super obvious, but I'm happy with this. And I have used some other modulation effects later on outside of SnapHeap. Yeah, and then I've got shaper, which is more distortion. I've got disperser giving me some wet, zappy stuff on the bottom. And I've got a filter that's also moving with the envelope. This is also moving with the envelope. This is tied to a macro. And this macro is the same that's also controlling these distortions. And I'm only controlling the mix knob on these. And this filter is essentially like, now we're getting a lot of high frequency buildup. So it's taming that, but not immediately. You'll notice that in the initial impact, it's open and then it closes in. This is without. With. That's cool. It's kind of getting kind of rocky and nice. I like that. After that, we've got some delay, some effects. I like to run delays into delays. Why do I do this? I honestly have no idea. I just like it. If I could run, 100 delays into each other serially, I will, and set them all up differently. I will totally do that. I probably should one day just to see what it's like and macro all of them together in some fun, interesting way. But I just like the sound of delays going into delays. No reason apart from the fact that I like it. If you don't like it, that's fine. If you do, run a bunch of random delays into each other. It's great. And I've got a filter on top because I don't want the affected signal to have full range. I just want it to be in the mid-range or the upper mids in this case. And that's why we have filter. This is running in parallel. So this signal is going out to the master, and then we've got this also going separately. And I can blend this in as much as I want with this FX macro over here. Right? It's pretty subtle, but it adds a little bit of extra tail and movement to the end. Then we've got another filter on top, which is being modulated by the audio follower. So here we're hitting something different. The audio follower is listening to this original raw signal, and you'll notice that it's got quite a bit of dynamic range. It's got a lot of movement. It's probably also changing, it's also affecting how the signal is being modulated based on frequency, blah, 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 all that stuff. It's kind of random, and it doesn't really correlate to the shape of the impact itself, but I like that. I like that it's a bit random. It feels random. You could also use a random LFO. There is such a thing as a random LFO to get a similar effect, but for some reason I've used an audio follower here. I might swap that in later for a random LFO, but for now, audio follower doing the trick. Right, it's cool. I like it. Post that, I've just got a little bit of gain reduction and hitting a limiter. Boom, we are in business. So you could stop here. Actually, you could have stopped, just at the first serial bus to just get the shape that essentially is, a transient. You're done. But you can take this further if you want. So what I've done is, instead of processing it just post SnapHeap, I've also processed pre-SnapHeap. So I've added a bunch of distortion to the signal itself going into SnapHeap, and it's a very different kind of distortion. This is black box. This came highly recommended to me by someone I really admire and look up to in the game audio world, and I picked it up and I've been really enjoying it. It's fantastic. If you get it on sale or discount, it's a really nice distortion and saturation plugin. Also, this one works in mid-side, so bonus. So I'm just cranking this. I'm not no thought really going into this apart from I just want lots of distortion, and I've also sort of filtered out the lows, so I'm not distorting the lows as much as I am everything else. Let's listen to that signal without SnapHeap. So that's just the distorted sound of me literally just blowing air into a mic. And then I'm filtering that out with an EQ. So not a lot of highs, not a lot of lows. We can filter this a bit more. And this distortion plus filter, or rather re-EQ, which I'm just going to refer to as filter now because it's easier. This gives me the opportunity to change how much low end and high end goes into the impact sound. So I can drastically modify how these impacts sound just by modulating this filter. So let's take a listen to what this sounds like here, and then we'll slowly pull back and add some low end. So this is almost like a size of the rock impact knob. Probably won't call it that, but it's making it's literally making me feel like I'm hearing smaller rocks impacting a surface versus bigger. It's pretty cool. I like this. It's very simple. It's very easy to set up, and it gives you a lot of variation just by moving one parameter around. And of course, you can mess with the distortion as well. You could maybe even modulate this if you wanted. But for now, I think this is making me, quite happy with the results. Now that's pre-SnapHeap. Post-SnapHeap, I'm doing EFX refract, which is essentially a kind of modulation. I've added the subtle octaver preset, which, as the name suggests, it adds an octave below, but not exactly like a pure octave. It's very textural. It's kind of weird. I honestly really don't know what it's doing, but it sounds kind of cool, and I'm just blending that in. I've tweaked a few things around here and there, but apart from that, it's mostly just that preset. So this is giving me a little bit more color, a little bit more movement, that kind of stuff. Without, with. It's also clipping with it on, so I might just take the output down a tad bit. Let's take it down by about 3. Still clipping, huh? Interesting. That's better. Okay. We've got refract. You can go as insane with this as you want. You can do that. Or you could do both. You can get a dry signal, you can get a wet signal, you can get a ton of variation. The whole point of this exercise, the whole point of setting up something that automates this process is so that I can literally feed any audio source into this, and within a matter of minutes get dozens and dozens of variations of a particular type of sound, which is very crucial when you're doing game audio work because you need variation. So that's modulation of some kind, whatever you want. I've used refract. You can pretty much use whatever you want. After that, I've got what I like to refer to as Poor Man's OTT. This is a plugin I got for free from Waves. It was some offer or something. It's great. It's really nice because it basically just cuts out a bunch of resonances. It doesn't notch them, but it slowly gently dips them based on how you're setting it up. It's probably not the best tool for this job. Soothe 2 is the best tool. I said Poor Man's OTT. No, I mean Soothe 2. That's what I mean. This is Poor Man's Soothe. OTT is free. Sorry, I take that back. This is the Poor Man's Soothe. And it does a pretty decent job, in my opinion, of taming resonances, despite not really being meant to do that on all sources. It's really meant to do that only on vocals. But it just kind of sounds good. I like the way it sounds. I don't really care that it says vocal on the tin. I like it. So let's listen to that with Silk and see what it sounds like. And let's listen to it without. So it's more like a low mid thing that it's taming in this particular case. And it's also got this cool dynamics knob, which I think kind of works like Axpress. They have a bunch of interesting dynamic plugins, Waves. I think it works kind of like that, where it's just doing it's sort of pushing things up and down at the same time. I think so. That's what it sounds like to me. Anyway, I like this plugin. It does some fun stuff. I would suggest not to be too bothered by marketing. just try stuff on everything. Honestly, most of the time I hardly use guitar rig on guitars, and I hardly use things for what they're designed for, because sometimes it's just too cool stuff. Okay, and finally we've got a limiter that's just there to protect us from clipping. And we're in business. Cool. So we have gone from noise. That's me. Again, that's just literally air. And it's a DATS mic 2, which is a shotgun mic, but you could do this with any mic. It doesn't matter. Actually, you don't even need to use this. You can throw any signal as long as it's a long sustained signal with some interesting stuff going on in it. It'll work. The original example I saw that inspired me to make this was using the sound of potatoes boiling. I will link that video in the description. Do watch it. It is awesome. And there's a lot of cool stuff happening there. I couldn't really dissect some of it, but the basic premise is the same. And that's that. If you have any questions about this, or even better, if you have suggestions for easier, simpler ways I could do this, please let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Cheers.